What if someone destroyed the one thing your family had protected for generations, without even knowing what it meant? When they tore down the century-old well on our land, they thought it was just old stone and dirt. But what they didn't know was that they had just messed with a piece of the town's hidden history, and that mistake was about to cost them more than they imagined. I still remember that eerie morning vividly. The sky was a dull, overcast gray, and an unusual quiet settled over the farm. It wasn't the normal hush of pre-dawn stillness. It was heavy, expectant, as if nature itself was holding its breath. I walked outside and saw a crowd gathered near where our family's well once stood, its ancient stones already torn away and the earth freshly churned. My heart sank as the reality of the loss hit me hard. That well wasn't merely a relic. It was a living testament to decades of hard work, sweat, and memories. A sacred landmark that had quenched the thirst of our ancestors and connected generations. The demolition crew, armed with heavy machinery and indifferent to the heritage they were obliterating, had treated it like any other outdated structure. They overlooked the legends whispered by our elders, that the well was imbued with stories of pioneering grit, of community resilience, and of secret meetings that shaped this very town. They saw nothing but crumbling stone. Yet to me, it was irreplaceable. It was the soul of our family and, in many ways, of our town. As I stared, disbelief turned rapidly into anger. How could they be so callous? How could they disregard the legacy of my family and the history of an entire town? I knew that the repercussions of this act would soon ripple outward, a reckoning that no one would escape. And deep down, I vowed that I would make sure their error would be met with a response as mighty and enduring as the history they had so recklessly attempted to erase. Our family's homestead sits at the edge of Willow Creek, a small town with deep roots and a proud history. For generations, my ancestors tended this land, nurturing it with the same care that they gave to every neighbor and every local tradition. At the heart of our compound stood the century-old well, built by my great-grandfather with his own two hands. It served as the lifeblood of the farm, providing water for the crops, the livestock, and for family gatherings that turned ordinary days into legendary tales. The well was more than a structure. It was a symbol of perseverance and an anchor for our family's legacy. Willow Creek itself is a town where history flows as deeply as the nearby river. Although modernity has crept in over the decades, much of the old charm persists. The streets are lined with aged brick buildings and time-worn storefronts, and families still tell stories of the founding days. Yet in recent years, forces of progress and strict regulations have begun to erode that history. A new homeowners association, HOA, has taken root in the town, enforcing modern standards that often clash with our age-old traditions. At the center of this clash is a woman known by many as HOA Karen. Karen is a no-nonsense enforcer of the new order, a stickler for conformity who believes that progress means erasing the past. With a clipboard always in hand and a sharp tongue, she patrols the town's public spaces like a hawk. To her, every deviation from the pristine modern look is an offense that must be corrected immediately. When she learned that our century-old well was still standing as a relic of a bygone era, she made it her mission to do something about it, convinced that historic structures didn't belong in a proper community. I, on the other hand, was raised to honor our history. My father always said, "Our well is a part of who we are. It connects us to the struggles and triumphs of our forebears." I grew up with those stories in my ears, learning the value of tradition and the importance of preserving what makes us unique. The well was a treasure trove of memories, a silent witness to celebrations, sorrows, and the enduring spirit of the town. As the new millennium reared its modern face, tensions began to stir between preserving our rich past and embracing a sanitized, uniform future. Local authorities, pressured by developers and strict HOA rules, started knocking down old structures deemed obsolete. It wasn't long before the century-old well became a target, and a demolition crew was dispatched with orders to remove it without a second thought. For me, this was unthinkable. I couldn't sit back while my family's legacy, and a cornerstone of Willow Creek's history was being erased. And so began my quest, not just for justice for my family, but for the soul of our town. I vowed that I would not let them destroy the well without a fight that would demand accountability, not just from the demolition crew, but from everyone who believed that history was disposable. The day the demolition began was a day etched in my memory. I arrived at the farm before dawn, determined to confront the sight of heavy machinery rending my family's legacy. There, before my eyes, massive excavators were tearing into the ground where the well once stood, kicking up clouds of dust and debris. I felt a mix of shock and anger surge through me. I ran to the scene, pleading with the foreman to halt the destruction, but my words were drowned out by the roar of the machines and the bureaucratic coldness behind their orders. I quickly documented everything, snapping photos and recording video footage. Every angle of the destruction was captured. The splintered stone, the earth being ripped apart, and the indifferent looks on the faces of the demolition crew. I forwarded my evidence to local preservation societies and posted on community forums, trying desperately to rally support. The response was immediate. Neighbors who'd long cherished our town's rich past began sharing their own stories of loss and indignation. However, as the chaos unfolded, I discovered that the plot ran deeper than mere demolition. It wasn't just the well that was being targeted. It was an attempt to rewrite our history, to replace the old with sterile new developments that offered no soul, only profit. Many in town had already whispered of similar acts. Aged barns replaced with modern condos, historic homes razed for chain stores, and cultural landmarks turned into parking lots. The well was merely the most personal blow, a direct strike against my family's contribution to the town's heritage. Fueled by anger and a newfound sense of duty, I decided that I couldn't let this injustice pass unchallenged. I began gathering more evidence, reaching out to longtime residents and historians who could attest to the well's significance. I compiled a digital dossier containing eyewitness accounts, historical documents, and photographs that spanned decades. Every piece of information underscored the well's pivotal role in our town's story, a narrative that the new regime desperately wanted to erase. As the demolition reached its peak, the community's response grew louder. Neighbors began staging protests, and signs declaring "Save our history" and "Stop the destruction" started appearing near the site. I organized a town meeting at the local community center, inviting historians, preservationists, and concerned citizens to share their insights on the well's importance. The turnout was overwhelming, and for the first time in years, a sense of communal pride began to reawaken. Yet the battle lines were drawn. The local authorities, under pressure from developers and supporters of the modern agenda, dismissed our pleas as nostalgic ramblings, irrelevant in the face of progress. Their cold, bureaucratic responses only fueled the fire of resistance. I realized that if our voices were to be heard, we had to take drastic action, a move that would shake the foundations of the town's current order. I decided that the only way to force a reckoning was to launch a counter-campaign, a public declaration that our history was not for sale, not for destruction. I began organizing rallies, collecting signatures for a petition to halt further demolitions, and reaching out to local media to cover our fight. Social media became our battleground. Hashtags like #SaveTheWell and #HistoryMatters swirled as the digital community rallied behind our cause. But the most personal blow was yet to come. I learned from a trusted source that the company responsible for the demolition had plans to build a modern housing complex on the very grounds that once cradled our family's well. That news set my resolve in stone. This wasn't just about stopping a demolition. It was about preventing the erasure of our collective history, a history that belonged to every resident of our town. In a moment of fierce determination, I vowed to fight back with every tool at my disposal. I reached out to lawyers specializing in preservation rights and prepared to take legal action. I also began to plan for a public demonstration that would not only protest the destruction, but also celebrate the well's legacy through art and storytelling. Every new piece of evidence, every testimonial from a longtime resident, added fuel to my cause, cementing my belief that we could and must reclaim our history by any means necessary. The following days were nothing short of a battleground. As the last fragments of the well were being cleared away by the demolition crew, the digital world exploded with news of the tragedy. Social media accounts, preservation blogs, and local news outlets began disseminating the story widely. Hashtags such as #SaveTheWell, #HistoryUnderAttack, and #LegacyLost trended, capturing the outrage of a community that had long felt marginalized by the relentless march of modernization. Local radio stations hosted lengthy debates on the issue, with historians and activists passionately arguing that the well was not merely a physical structure, but the heart of our town's heritage. This well fed our ancestors and witnessed our triumphs and tragedies. One local historian said during an on-air interview, "And now it's being reduced to rubble by those who care nothing for our past." The words resonated with many, and public sentiment began to shift dramatically. At the same time, my digital dossier, painstakingly compiled with every photograph, video clip, and testimonial, continued to circulate, galvanizing support from neighbors and even inspiring some to come forward with their own stories of historic loss. Community meetings were held in packed local halls, where residents debated fiercely about how to preserve what remained of our heritage and how to ensure that no other piece of our history was allowed to be erased. I attended one such meeting and saw, for the first time, the raw emotion of the townspeople: tears, angry voices, and a shared determination to fight back. It was clear that the demolition of our well had become a turning point, an act that symbolized the broader assault on our community's identity. The local government, long in cahoots with developers and seemingly indifferent to the pleas for preservation, issued only curt statements declaring that the demolition was routine and necessary for progress. Their dismissive tone further fanned the flames of protest. I organized a series of peaceful demonstrations, encouraging residents to take to the streets with banners, songs, and testimonials about the well's significance. Every demonstration was a vibrant display of community unity, a defiant stand against the forces that sought to replace our rich history with sterile, modern constructs. As tensions escalated, the developers began to move forward with their plans to transform the site into a modern housing complex. Blueprints and renderings of gleaming apartments and commercial spaces were released, and the news of this future development triggered fresh waves of anger. Neighbors took to social media to condemn the plan, arguing that it not only destroyed a historic landmark, but would permanently alter the character of our town. Online petitions demanding the halt of the project gathered thousands of signatures, and local advocates prepared to take legal action to challenge the permits issued for the construction. I also reached out to a network of preservation societies and historical commissions, sharing my digital dossier and pleading for their intervention. Their response was encouraging. A coalition of local historians, civic leaders, and concerned citizens began to rally around our cause. Late-night meetings were held in basements and community centers, where strategies were hatched to appeal to the county commissioners and to force a thorough review of the redevelopment plans. The rallying cry was simple: our history is not for sale, and no amount of progress is worth the erasure of our legacy. Amid this whirlwind, I kept updating the online community with every new piece of evidence, every statement from a supportive local official, and every rumor of impending legal action. The message was clear: the demolition of the well was only the beginning of a struggle for the soul of our town. Every post, every shared video clip, and every supportive comment further emboldened the movement, and soon even those who had once been indifferent found themselves swept up in the passionate fight to reclaim our heritage. The pressure reached its zenith when the county announced a public hearing to address the redevelopment permits. This hearing, scheduled for a crisp morning a week later, was widely publicized. The community braced for a showdown that would determine whether our voices could finally halt the tide of progress that threatened our past. The stage was set, and as I reviewed the final details of our digital dossier, every recorded testimony and every photograph of the ruined well, I knew that the moment of truth was near. Our future, and that of our town's history, hung in the balance. The decisive moment arrived on a brisk morning in a packed county hall. The room was filled with local officials, preservation advocates, developers, and hundreds of passionate residents, all gathered for the pivotal public hearing that would determine the fate of the demolished well and the redevelopment project. With a firm, steady voice and eyes ablaze with conviction, County Commissioner Deborah Lawson took the podium. After a thorough review of all the digital evidence, community testimonies, and historical records, we have reached a definitive conclusion, Commissioner Lawson began. It is abundantly clear that the demolition of the century-old family well was not a routine act of progress, but a grievous error that has desecrated a vital piece of our town's heritage. What was once a symbol of resilience, community spirit, and our shared past has been reduced to rubble by those who cared nothing for the history it embodied. A heavy silence descended upon the room as she continued. Effective immediately, we are halting all redevelopment permits associated with this project and initiating a full review of the decisions that led to this demolition. We will also set up a special task force to protect our remaining historical landmarks, ensuring that such an atrocity is never repeated. Today's decision is not just about the well. It is a resounding affirmation that our community values its heritage above all else. The room erupted in applause and murmurs of approval. At that moment, a longtime community advocate, renowned for his passionate defense of local history, rose to speak. Today, we reclaim our past and safeguard our future, he declared, his voice resolute and powerful. No one should be allowed to demolish the very foundations upon which our community was built without consequence. Let this be the turning point, a clear signal that we will stand united to preserve our heritage and our identity. We demand accountability, and we will not rest until our town's history is honored as it should be. His words were met with thunderous applause, uniting everyone in a chorus of determination. Following his address, a team of historical experts and preservation officers presented the final dossier, a meticulously compiled record of digital evidence, archival photographs, personal testimonies, and expert analyses confirming the historical significance of the well. The evidence was irrefutable. This wasn't just an old structure, but a living monument that had witnessed the struggles and triumphs of generations. The task force unanimously endorsed the motion to halt the redevelopment and to establish stringent measures protecting our historical sites. Commissioner Lawson concluded, "Let this resolution mark the dawn of a new era for our community, a community that honors its past and champions the preservation of our heritage. Our decision today is a resounding declaration that our town's history is not for sale and that every act of historical erasure will be met with unwavering resistance. Together, we stand for justice, accountability, and the inalienable right to preserve our shared legacy." Her final words, delivered with unwavering conviction, sealed the turning point in our struggle to reclaim our history. In that defining moment, as every face in the county hall shone with resolve and hope, the balance of power shifted irrevocably. The overwhelming digital evidence and the unified voice of our community forced the county to take decisive action, a turning point that would forever reshape how our town valued its heritage. The days of cavalier demolition and heedless redevelopment were over, and a future built on reverence for our history was finally within our grasp. In the weeks that followed the landmark public hearing, our community experienced a profound renaissance of pride and determination. News of the halted redevelopment permits and the creation of a special task force dedicated to historical preservation spread like wildfire. Local media featured inspirational stories of residents banding together to save the town's heritage, with headlines such as "A New Dawn for Our History" and "Community United to Preserve the Past." Hashtags like #SaveOurHistory and #LegacyPreserved trended widely, reaffirming our collective commitment to protect what was once almost lost. Town hall meetings and community forums saw an unprecedented surge in attendance as neighbors gathered to share stories of local heritage and to discuss plans for restoring what had been demolished. Many of us, who had grown up hearing tales of the old well and the sacrifices of our ancestors, felt an immense duty to pass on that legacy to future generations. We organized historical walking tours, set up a digital archive of the town's rich past, and even commissioned art installations that celebrated our shared history. Our heritage is our bond, one resident passionately declared at a packed meeting, and we will not allow it to be trampled by senseless progress. At the same time, the county government, pressured by public outcry and the tireless efforts of our newly formed preservation task force, began to overhaul its policies regarding historical sites. Regular audits were instituted, and a dedicated fund was established to restore and maintain historical landmarks. Local contractors and historians collaborated on projects to rebuild what could be salvaged from the old well, ensuring that future generations would have a tangible connection to our past. I, too, felt a deep sense of personal vindication. My digital dossier, documenting every moment of the demolition, the community's heartfelt responses, and our brave stand in the public hearing, became a symbol of what one individual could inspire when they dared to fight for what mattered. My humble efforts to preserve my family's legacy and to defend our town's history had sparked a citywide movement. Neighbors who had once felt powerless now took pride in their role as stewards of the past, and stories of our struggle were shared widely, inspiring similar movements in neighboring communities. The long-standing critics, those who had dismissed our efforts as sentimental nostalgia, were forced to confront the power of a united community. Even some members of the previously unyielding HOA began to acknowledge that preserving our history could coexist with progress. The rigid lines between past and present blurred, replaced by a vision of a future that honored its roots even as it embraced modernity. At a celebratory event held in the town square, complete with community members, local officials, and historians, a large plaque was unveiled next to a reconstructed section of the old well. The plaque read, "In memory of our past, for the promise of our future," a testament to the resilience and unity of our community. Speeches filled the air, resonating with gratitude and hope. Today, we celebrate not merely the recovery of what was lost, but the birth of a renewed commitment to preserve our heritage, said one local leader, his voice filled with emotion. As each new day dawned over our revitalized town, the legacy of that fateful demolition endured as a permanent reminder of our strength. The story of how someone once thought they could erase generations of history by demolishing a century-old well had instead ignited a powerful movement, a movement that reaffirmed the inalienable right to honor our past. Every sunrise now carried the promise that our history, our sacrifices, and our communal legacy would forever be cherished. In the end, what began as a personal tragedy evolved into a watershed moment for our entire town. We emerged more united, more vigilant, and more determined to protect our heritage against any future threats. And as the sun rose each morning over our town, its light dancing on the restored stones of our once-lost well, it carried with it the enduring promise that our history would always be preserved, respected, and celebrated.